Welcome back, everybody. Just a few moments until class starts. Great to be with you guys, and hope you're all having a good week. Okay, just a little bit of time until we really start. Okay, well, it's now more or less 12:45, so I'm going to just get us underway here slowly but surely. Um, I'm recording the Zoom meeting, but I'm also running a YouTube live stream at the same time as I have in a couple of the other meetings. So that'll ensure that we have a very good quality playback and a good record of the chat for those that want to come back to the topics and lectures later. But thanks anyways for being here, everybody. And I'll hold for a while before I ask everyone to leave their comments and things for attendance, because I know it takes a little while for people to reach the meeting once we get started. But yeah, thanks. So I'll just start off by mentioning a couple of basic concepts and things about our schedule. So thanks so much, everybody, for just taking the midterm. I know we all took the midterm on Tuesday, so I'm working through the grading on those exams, and I'll try my best to get them done over the weekend. They should be ready by Tuesday, and then I'll be able to report back to each student what their grade is and how you're doing in the course overall. But now with that midterm behind us, we move on to a new set of topics and a new chapter in our book. The next thing that you want to keep on the radar in terms of our schedule. Hey there, Foster. Good to see you and everybody else. I was just saying that next week, Thursday, would have been the due date for homework number 2. I'm actually going to extend the due date of that just slightly to give you a little more time and to give us a little more time to kind of build up our knowledge on this chapter 5 topic of fallacies. So essentially, I'm going to extend it until maybe the end of the day on Friday or even Saturday. Yeah, so that's the plan. The next thing that comes forward is homework 2. We need to basically get through the material today and then Tuesday for you to be ready to do that. So that's why I want to give you a little bit of additional time to complete it. It's not going to be the worst homework assignment ever. It's just another one of our little workbook exercises from the textbook in chapter 5. But anyway, aside from that, today we're beginning on chapter 5. So let me, I guess, now that we have a few of us here, feel free at any point in the meeting to leave some type of comment, just as a way of keeping those records of attendance current. You just could say hi or anything that you like at any point. Okay, cool. And thanks so much. All right, then let's get into it, Chapter 5. So we've covered a couple of different interesting topics and things in our class to this point. We started with Chapter 8 and 7, which are all about argument and fundamental concepts in logic, like what even is an argument, what is deduction, what is induction, what is validity, soundness, what is inductive strength, what are the different forms of deductively valid argument, and all of those topics. Then Chapter 1 was about some famous social psychology experiments like Milgram and Zimbardo, the qualities that good critical thinkers have, the stages in cognitive development, stages in the critical thinking process, what are the obstacles and the barriers to being a good critical thinker, what are some of the benefits of it, okay? And then Chapter 3 was all about language and communication, what even is language, what are different functions of language, what are different types of meanings and definitions, what are some rhetorical devices and communication styles and things of that kind, what are qualities of a good definition, okay? And then Chapter 4, we just finished, that's all about knowledge and the limits of knowledge. What is knowledge? What is truth, belief, justification? What's evidence? What are some unreliable sources of evidence like hearsay and anecdote? What are qualities to look for in evaluating the views of experts? What are good research resources to rely on? And then what are certain cognitive and perceptual errors that we can sometimes make? Okay, and so from there, now we're on to Chapter 5. Chapter 5 gets us into a very important topic in introductory logic, which is all about what are called fallacies. So that's what we're focused on for the next week, and also this week and next week as well. Chapter 5, fallacies. Okay. Okay, fallacies. So we want to know exactly what fallacies are and be able to identify them, try and avoid committing them on our own, and be able to call them out when other people do them to us. So to get us started, let us try and know what a fallacy even is. So fallacy. So a fallacy is just what happens when an argument contains a logical error or a flaw, and that makes the argument weak. So when an argument contains a logical error or a flaw, it is a fallacious argument. That would be the adjectival way of talking about the noun term of a fallacy. It's fallacious if it contains a fallacy. And so we know that arguments are attempts to support a conclusion by giving reasons or premises that back the claim up. But not all arguments are equal. Some arguments are solid, valid, sound, inductively strong. But then you have some weak and invalid arguments. In some cases, the premises don't provide the proper type of support to the conclusion. And an argument has a fallacy when a close inspection of it shows that it has one of these logical errors or flaws. And throughout history, over thousands of years, many different types of fallacies have been identified and given names. And so our job and mission right now in Chapter 5 is just to become familiar with these different fallacies, be able to identify them, define them, and to be able to produce examples of them if we were asked to do that. So sometimes fallacies can be very misleading because without knowing much about these concepts, you can look at the argument and at a first glance, it can seem to be a persuasive, compelling argument. So you actually need to know about fallacies so that you can tell the difference between when you have a high quality argument and one that's filled with logical errors and flaws. Fallacious arguments are in a way dangerous because they can shape your views without good logical reasoning. So let's try and master these fallacies and know what they are. Now, at the beginning of a lot of the different chapters in our book, we've seen that the editor of the book tries to get our interest in the topic by bringing up some kind of real-world example or stories. Like in Chapter 1, they talk to us about those famous social psychology experiments, Milgram and Zimbardo, to highlight the value of good critical thinking for everybody. In Chapter 3, they talked about the Benghazi scandal, where miscommunication might have contributed to a lack of preparedness for an orderly evacuation. In chapter 4, we learned about these famous cases of medical error where basic cognitive mistakes led to like horrifying medical problems, like amputating the wrong leg or something. And that was to give us a sense of how knowledge has got limits. Well, anyway, in the top of chapter 5 here, there's also a little bit of a real life story to try and set the topic for us and get us thinking about it. So I'll just relay that to you. They start with chapter 5 talking about a woman named Shannon Townsend. Now, Shannon Townsend basically was a talented student academically in high school. She was an honors student, and then she got into the University of Colorado, and she was doing really well there in her first semester. She had a 3.9 GPA, and she was on the honor roll. But at the end of her freshman year, something bad happened. She ended up getting involved with this cult group named the Brethren. And the Brethren is a cult that's led by this charismatic cult leader named Jim Roberts. And part of what they make you do as a part of their cult is to cut off ties with everyone that's not a member of the cult. So if you have friends and family members, classmates, you're supposed to abandon all of them, give up your worldly possessions, and just live communally with the other members of the Brethren. And ever since she did that, at the end of her freshman year, she'd never been seen by her family again. And you may see this story and think, well, that's an isolated case. And in a way, maybe, but it's actually true that hundreds of college students each year will do similar things, being recruited into dangerous cult movements that are organized around mind control, excessive devotion to a single person or a narrow set of ideas, isolating you. Yes, that's right, Sky, so that you can't have a different opinion. Now, how is it that people are able to be recruited into these cults? Well, the tactics that the cult recruitment use are to involve you in manipulative and deceptive reasoning. They hit you with a lot of fallacious arguments, which have the outward appearance of being credible arguments. And to those that are not skilled in the knowledge of what fallacies are, they could easily be taken by some of these misleading and fallacious claims and arguments. They prey on young people a lot of times. Young people, young adults are sometimes the easier targets of these cult recruitment efforts because you're struggling sometimes with the newfound independence and freedom that you have as a young adult. You know, you live in a household pretty much until you're about 18, where everything in your life is highly regulated by your parents, your guardians, your teachers, and your society. And then all of a sudden you reach your adult age and you're kind of thrust into this newfound independence and adult status. And some people struggle with that. They want to find an identity. They want to find their way in this world. And knowing that, cults sometimes will use that vulnerability, lack of assertiveness, dependence on others, and a struggle for identity as their fertile ground for recruitment. So we want to be the kind of people that are not so easy for these cults to recruit. And you may wonder, what is the number one sort of remedy or antidote to being the easy target of cults? Well, cult specialist and clinical counselor Ron Burks and others have said that it's simply good critical thinking that is the cure here, or the way to make sure that you don't fall into these scary groups. Here's a quote from Ron Burks in the book. He says, "The best way to avoid being targeted by a cult is critical thinking. Cults don't like people who are constantly thinking and asking questions. So instead of being the kind of person who just hears information from some source and says, wow, tell me more, I didn't know that, the critical thinker is inclined to ask tough questions like, how do you know that? What's the proof? Can you show me your evidence? And why should I believe that? So good critical thinkers demand high standards of evidence, and they don't just go along with what they are told unless the evidence really shows it. So those are the toughest people for any cult to recruit, because they really rely on people to simply go along, accept what they're saying, and yearn for membership in a group. So we want to know what these fallacies are. By knowing what they are, we have power, because when you know what they are, you're immune to the effect they may have on any appeal to your judgment. So that's our goal. We're going to try and become comprehensively aware of what different fallacies there are, what different categories of fallacies they are, so we can both avoid being manipulated by such arguments and also, to the best of our own ability, avoid committing these fallacies ourselves. Sometimes we do engage in fallacious reasoning, even the best of us, and it is only by knowing what these different kinds of erroneous arguments are that we're able to correct our behavior a little bit and do somewhat better. Kay, you're comment. Let me see. There's also a charisma of usually the cult leader. They attract people and get their attention using us versus them concept with gullible people. That's right. Yes, exactly true. And Gabriel, you say bonus points because you also get an us them mentality. Yes, that's right. Okay, it divides people into the two categories. I see you guys are both on the same page, Gabriel and Kay. So good in two different chats, making similar points, and that's all very good and reasonable. So let's go ahead now. We've learned what a fallacy is. It's when an argument contains a logical error or a flaw. In the next 3 meetings today and Tuesday, Thursday next week, we're going to get into 3 different categories of fallacies, okay? So the first category that we will learn today are called fallacies of ambiguity. And what the fallacies of ambiguity are, okay, you guys are funny. Yeah, not to worry, it's all good. You guys have the same insights. But yeah, what I'm saying to you are what are fallacies of ambiguity? Fallacies of ambiguity happen when an argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts. So I'm going to type that out. Okay, there we have it. Fallacy of ambiguity. When an argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between two similar concepts, then it commits a fallacy of ambiguity. Now, let's make sure to be keeping one thing clear. The words fallacy of ambiguity, that is not the name of a particular fallacy. That's the name of a category of fallacies. In the same sense, the word mammal is not the name of a specific animal. It's the name of a type of animal. And within the category of mammal, there's all the different individual types like human beings, lion, cat, tiger, dog, you know. So with fallacies of ambiguity, that's an umbrella term. And within it, there are examples of 5. Okay, so there are 5 specific fallacies of ambiguity. Fallacies of ambiguity are all those that commit these confusion between similar concepts, sloppy grammar, or ambiguous words. But now we're going to list off what the 5 specific members of the fallacy of ambiguity family are, if you want to call it that. So these are the 5 things to really master today. Equivocation. Okay, so that's 1. Then there is, sorry, let me get in both chats. Equivocation. Then there's what's called Amphiboles. Amphiboles fallacy. Okay. Third, it's the fallacy of accent. Okay, fallacy of accent. And then 2 more. There's what's called the fallacy of division. And then last but not least, the fallacy of composition. Okay. So those are the 5 items to really hone in on today. These 5 different fallacies of ambiguity, so-called. And we're going to go through them one by one. We're going to give the definitions for each, and then we will also try to supply examples for each one as we go through it. So then, beginning with the first fallacy of ambiguity, it's called equivocation. So let us all get on the same page with what is equivocation. Okay, so the equivocation fallacy is basically when an argument contains a key term, and the key term is used multiple times, but the problem is that the meaning of this key term or phrase changes midway through the argument. So I'll write that out. When a key term in an argument appears multiple times and this is the problem, and with different meanings. Okay, so let me give it to you. The key term in an argument appears multiple times, but with different meanings. So with language, as we've learned, a single word can have more than one meaning. If you look at words in the dictionary, you'll notice that there's usually not just a single meaning that's associated with the word. There will be like a primary meaning, and then there will be other less common definitions of the term that are listed in a list. So, like if you looked up the word square, for example, in the dictionary, I'm sure the first definition that you'd find would be in reference to the geometrical figure of a square. But then some ways down in the list of possible definitions, you might also see, like, I don't know, a place where people congregate at the downtown area, like a town square. Or maybe a little further down the line, you might see like the slang usage of it to refer to somebody who's not cool or whatever, like a square, they're not hip. You know, so knowing this about language, we can understand that a single word can have multiple different possible interpretations. The problem is when someone makes an argument with that word used over again, but they've changed the meaning and it doesn't have a single meaning throughout. In that sense, we equivocate on the meaning of the key term. So I'm going to give you guys like a simple kind of silly example of this equivocation fallacy, and then we'll work on a couple of other examples too from there. So I'm just typing it out as an argument here. First premise says, Joe is at the bank. Joe's at the bank. Okay, now second premise below that says a bank is a financial institution. Okay. So just off of these two premises, everybody, I think it's an elementary conclusion to draw. What is the logical conclusion that follows? Joe's at a bank. A bank's a financial institution. And so therefore, thus, what? Pretty straightforward, I hope. Someone can let me know. What's the right conclusion of this two-premise argument? Joe's at bank. Bank is financial institution. So therefore, it follows that, let me know. Conclusion, somebody. Well, Gabriel, you say Joe's doing financial stuff. That is something that I guess we can't 100% say. He could be robbing the bank or he could be just sitting there getting coffee at the bank. But Alan, yeah, you have it. Certainly, if he's at a bank and a bank is a financial institution, you'd think that the conclusion is Joe is at a financial institution based on those first two premises. Okay, so I'll just write it in both chats. Therefore, Joe is at a financial institution. Okay, so at a first glance, it's like, yeah, no problem. That seems like a valid argument. It just follows logically from the two premises. But let us interrogate the argument a little more. Which keys term or word in the two premises there could be used in different ways? What is a word you think that might be, as we say, equivocated upon in the two premises given? Let's see if anyone can tell me. There's not too many options, but there's one word that appears multiple times, and it could be having different definitions. Which one? Just a question. So hold on, Kay. That's three words. And I'm just asking about a word that appears more times than once in the first two premises. Not the word is, Sky. No. Although I have heard people say, what is the definition of is? That's a kind of famous quote from former President Bill Clinton when he was deposed. But yeah, bank is what I was actually hinting towards, bank. Okay, now, one meaning of the word bank, let me put it here. Yes, that's correct, bank. One meaning of bank is financial bank. Okay, and so clearly that's one way that we use the word bank. We talk about Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase Bank, a place where you can deposit money, request loans, and so forth, right? Financial bank is one meaning of the word. But what's a different meaning of the word bank? Gabriel, I guess you're already kind of hinting at it. Does everybody in both chats have an idea about this? What's a different possible meaning of the word bank? I know it might be repetitive because I see Gabriel's already kind of put something out there, but we can give a few examples. Bank doesn't have to refer to the financial type of bank. What are other meanings of the same word? Nobody has anything? Come on. Bank. Different meaning of bank. Bank, not financial bank, but food bank. Okay, there you go, Alan. Or it could be a blood bank or a sperm bank. Or like what you said, Gabriel, the edge of the river, like the Mississippi River banks. There's also the bank shot in basketball. So these other word or these other uses of the word don't refer to any kind of financial use of the term. So I'm going to put that other term of the word bank below here. Another meaning is banking on something would be another thing, yes. Oops, sorry, one second. Sometimes people can like say, oh, there's an answer bank for the test, or a question bank, like just a repository of something that holds all those things. Oh, sorry, I keep getting the wrong, my bad. I'm just copying and pasting. Sorry, just take me 1 second. I made a mistake. Okay, so looking back at our original argument above, it says first premise, Joe's at a bank. Second premise, bank's financial institution. So it appears to conclude that he's at a financial institution. But what if in the first premise I told you that when we say Joe's at the bank, we just meant that he's fishing at the Mississippi River bank? And in the second premise, bank clearly is used in the other sense of the financial sense of the word. But if that's what we've done, used bank in these two different ways, does the conclusion follow anymore? If Joe's at a riverbank in premise 1, and in premise 2 we say bank is a financial institution, can we really conclude that he's at a financial institution? No. It doesn't follow anymore because this critical term bank has been used in different ways in the two positions within the argument. So although it looks like a valid argument, it actually is equivocal and fallacious. Now, sometimes these kind of equivocations can happen in the course of conversation with other people too. And there's a few examples of that in the book, so let me draw your attention to those. Imagine that Carl and Juan are having a discussion about physician-assisted suicide, and they kind of have different opinions about whether that's good or right. Carl says this to his friend Juan. He says, Juan, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. And Juan fires back, Carl, that's not true. There is no right to that in the US law. Now, what is a word that both of these individuals have used, but they seem to be using it with different meanings? Once again, I repeat. Carl says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. Juan responds, that's not true. There's no right to that in the US law. What do you think is the word that I'm hinting towards, which is used differently by our two subjects here? Let's get a guess from somebody. That's right, Alan and Catherine. Yes, the word right. Now, when Carl says that terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die, what do you think is the use of the word right that he is appealing to? By saying that terminally ill patients have this right, what do you think, if you could say it, he means by saying they have this right to decide how and when they want to die? In what sense of the word right is he saying that? Right as in self-evident versus right as in guaranteed by law. Okay, sort of right, Gabriel. So in the first claim, where Carl says terminally ill patients have this right, he's talking about, yeah, thanks, Catherine. That's another sense of it. The word right could mean correct, or it could mean going towards the right directionally. But anyway, in this example, what's referred to by Carl is like a moral right. Okay, so moral versus legal right, which is what Juan is talking about. Okay, yes. Time, get that clear. Yeah, so, well, right with a W would be a different word with the same phonological sequence, but different symbols. Yeah, so anyway, moral right versus legal right. Carl says terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. What he means by that is they ought to be allowed to do this because of the natural human rights that we all should recognize. And when Juan says there's no right to that in the law, what he's saying is that as of today, this right has not yet been established by the legislators and by the lawmakers. So they're really talking past each other. It's basically Carl saying people ought to be allowed to do this, and Juan saying people have not yet been given the legal availability to do it. But that's a different point. It's not really contradicting the claim that Carl makes, which is that people ought to be given this freedom or liberty. So could it be considered a right to happiness? Well, some people say that we are all endowed with inalienable rights, meaning they can't be taken away, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are those, lofty words from the Declaration of Independence. Um, and I mean, I guess according to those fine words, we should be guaranteed some measure of freedom to pursue our personal happiness. But it's not a right to happiness; it's a right to the pursuit of it. You know. Anyway, though, because you can't guarantee that anyone will be happy. Sometimes it's very hard to make people happy, even if they're fully supplied with everything they need. But everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit, at least the chase, the seeking out of happiness, at least according to those intuitions of our founders. But back to the discussion. Here's another example from the book. So back in 2010, at that time, Democratic Senator Harry Reid was the majority leader of the Senate. Um, Yeah, well, Gabriel, that's a very, I don't know, that's a very jaded or cynical view of rights, isn't it? I mean, perhaps, but if you read some of the Platonic writings of the ancient Greeks, Plato and Socrates thought that right was not just might makes right. There was a Greek general named Meno who did think so, who thought that, whoever is the stronger hand is the one that gets to determine what we call justice. But I don't know, that was invalidated through Socratic reasoning by the master philosopher Socrates. But it's an argument that can be given. Anyway, though, I was going to say this: in 2010, Harry Reid was the Democratic senator, leader of the majority in the Senate, and he had this quote that he gave, which was this: "If you're a man and out of work, you may beat up your wife." Now, Fox News reporter team took this quote out of context and said to their audience, "Isn't it terrible that Harry Reid is out here saying to everybody that it is okay for men that are out of work to beat up their wives? What a horrible statement. How can he really think that it's okay for a man that's out of work to beat up their wife?" But what is the key term that they are almost deliberately misunderstanding in order for them to make this interpretation? I'll refer you back to the original statement. It says, "If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife." What word is the reporting team on Fox focused on in getting this false characterization of the senator's words? Okay, very good, Gabriel, the word may. So let us not beat, no, because there's probably no real other interpretation of that word in this context, but the word may is the one to be focused on. So focusing on his statement, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. Let's go into that. What are different possible meanings of the one word may? And not I'm talking about the month of May. But aside from that, what are other possible meanings of the word may? Okay, Gabriel, so you can say granting permission. That's one sense of the word may. Another sense of the same word would be to just talk about possibility. So may can equal permission to do something. May as in permission versus may as possibility. Now, when Harry Reid said, "If you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife," what do you think he actually meant? In what sense of the word may? Do you think he was saying it's okay by me and I'm giving permission for men who are out of work to do this? May as in it's socially acceptable, or what? To be charitable to the speaker, we would assume that he really meant possibility, yeah. And so that is what he was saying, that statistically speaking, if you just look at the demographics, when people are in lower socioeconomic conditions, there's a higher incidence of acts of domestic violence. That is not the same thing as saying, I give permission and authorization and support for people that are poor who are out of work to beat their wives. Um, so he meant it in the sense of it's possible or more likely in case one's poor that this will happen. And to make it sound like he was saying something sensational or controversial, the reporters made it appear as though he was saying, if you're out of work, go right ahead. It's okay. You may beat up your wife. In a similar way, we've, I think, heard the humorous exchange that people have had with the use of the word can. Can also be used to refer to either possibility or permission. So say that you're a student in a classroom or just wherever in life, and you ask somebody, "May I use the can I use the bathroom?" Let's go that way. Can I use the bathroom? And somebody, to be a wise guy, replies, "I don't know. Can you?" Now, of course, when the question was asked, it was like, "May I have permission to do so?" And the one that gives the smart aleck response is basically like reinterpreting it as they're asking whether it's possible for them to do. Are they capable of doing it? And so obviously that's another use of equivocation, somewhat for humorous effect there. But sometimes there's more on the line when it comes to equivocation. Let me give you another example of this that is, I think, a little more socially significant. So at another school where I sometimes teach, Cal State Fullerton, I'm asked sometimes to teach the philosophy of love and sex, which is an interesting course where we kind of survey like attitudes towards love that go all the way back to the ancient Greek writings, all the way up to the current day. And then we also discuss stuff like, I don't know, the ethics of sexual consent and all the rest. So while I teach that material, sometimes we speak about how there can sometimes be a fallacy of equivocation in the way some people argue about the topic of sexual consent. So let me just give you a quick example of what I'm talking about here in the chat. Suppose that someone places this argument. Premise one, if she consents to it, then it is permissible for me to have sex with her. Okay, so let that be the first premise of the little argument that I'm building up here for you. Second premise is just going to say, by not physically resisting, she gave consent. Okay. Now, it would appear that based on these two premises, if she consents, then it's permissible to proceed with the sexual act. And by not physically resisting, she gave the consent. It would appear, at least on the surface, that the conclusion would be it was permissible for me to have sex with her. But we're going to interrogate this argument and expose the fallacy. Okay. So looking at this argument, what all-important term that's used in the first two premises is perhaps being equivocated on and used in two different non-identical ways? Let me see if anyone can give a reasonable guess here or judgment. What key phrase or term in those first two premises is not being used in the same way? Shouldn't be too bad. Let me know when you've got it. No, because the word gave only appears once. Yeah, well, Gabriel, some people do in fact say those things, but we have to get the point clear first. What's the key term that is being equivocated on in the first two premises? Not is your second guess? No. Also, the word not only appears once. You're clear, right, that it has to be something that appears more than once, because in that case, we can say that it's used differently in the two different places where it appears. It's the word consent, everybody. Come on. Consent. So in the first premise, in which chat, Sky? Really? You only see one premise, so 1, 2, 3 above is not all visible? I'm not sure why. Let me ask others. Are the three statements in the YouTube live stream visible? Is it not? My statements, it only has the second. Oh, okay. Well, let me just do it again. Weird. Okay. You know what it could be? It might be that it's like doing some weird like little editing thing. Here, I'm going to put it back in. Sorry, guys. That shouldn't be the case. 1 second. No, I'll get it, guys. I don't know why though. It's funny because if I shared you my screen, you would see that on my screen it shows all three. Now, is that showing the one that I just put in? Let me know. Just let me see. Do you see the current comment in the chat or no? I just put something there. No? Okay, well, it seems to me that okay, let me try another thing. How about that one? Is that showing? Or not? Are there any comments? The one that says relations? Okay, well, I had to change it. I guess for some reason, some algorithm is trying to block the use of the word sex in the chat, which is weird. But anyway, So I'll just change it from sex to the word relations. If there's a little delay, then that's fine. But anyway, just wanted to get that clear. So let's back a second up and make sure that we are all clear about the full argument that's written. I put it in both chats, Zoom and YouTube. I've never had that issue before, but I'm thinking it's just a small glitch or a censorship thing. In the earlier class meeting, I didn't have that, so it was kind of a surprise to me to see it. But anyway, because I just teach this class back to back, 11:10 to 12:35, 12:45 to 2:10. Okay, but anyway, guys, let me just say this. It is the word consent. Now, can everybody see all the premises? Look at premise 1. Premise 1 says, if a person consents to it, then it's permissible to proceed with a sexual action. Okay? Now, what kind of consent actually makes it legitimate for a person to go forward with a sexual act? Like, what type of consent makes it okay for an adult to have sex with another adult? Can you give me that answer? What form of consent makes it an acceptable act? Yes, verbal, explicit consent, where you give a straightforward and clear verbal token of consent. So something explicit. Now, in the second premise, where it says, by not physically resisting, she gave consent, that is changing the meaning of consent from something explicit to something implicit or tacit. Like, well, she didn't say no, or she didn't fight back or something, so I'm going to interpret that as some kind of act of consent. But of course, the conclusion does not follow if we switch from a explicit to an implicit definition of consent halfway through the argument. And so a lot of people, reason in this equivocal way, and it's a fallacy. And in this case, of course, there's something much more important at stake. You can think of other cases too in life where you want to be attentive to the meaning of words. If you sign contracts or, I don't know, terms of service, user agreements, you might want to pay attention to the legal definition of key terms that you're agreeing to, because sometimes the way that an average individual understands the meaning of a term is different from the legal interpretation that it has. And sometimes we will therefore violate terms of service or contracts without knowing it, because we're acting according to a more informal understanding of the word's meaning. Now, I don't want to disagree with you at all, Gabriel, above. I don't think it's legitimate at all for somebody to believe that consent could simply be not physically resisting somebody. But, this is the way that sometimes people try to reason, or at least to try and create some, excuse for their behavior or some type of logical, justification for it, but it's not good. So we see arguments about sexual consent that are equivocating on the term consent, switching from a more direct and authorized act to something implicit and interpreted by the other person. Okay, another example from the book, just to close this off. 2-year-old Katie is very tall. Her father, on the other hand, is not tall. He's average in height. So therefore, Katie is taller than her father. But no, that's not necessarily true either. In this case, the one word that's being used differently is the word tall. We say that Katie, the 2-year-old, is tall. We say that her father is not tall. But when we say of Katie that she's tall, we mean what? Tall for a 2-year-old girl. And when we say that the father's not tall, we mean not tall with reference to average adult male height. And so obviously, using tall in those two different senses of the word does not imply that because she's tall and he isn't, that she's taller than him. Tall for a 2-year-old, not tall for an adult male. We can still have a consistent basis to say that he's taller than her. Okay, so we're moving on then to the next of our 5 examples here today, and that is Amphibole. So the Amphibole fallacy, the second of our fallacies of ambiguity. Okay, Amphibole. This is the fallacy of grammatical error or mistake. So this is when the argument contains a grammatical error, and because of that, we just don't know which conclusion to draw. So let me get that here. Okay. Yeah, so when there's a grammatical mistake in an argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn, sorry, it should say which instead of with. Okay, so here's some simple examples of this. Little backstory. So Terry Schiavo was a woman in Florida in the early 2000s who tragically suffered a traumatic head injury in an automobile accident. And because of that, she went brain dead and she was being kept alive on these life support machines. But without those life support machines, she would have just died. And her brain activity was just canceled out completely. And the doctors and everyone said that she has no hopes to regain consciousness at all. So she's what the sometimes are called a vegetable, a person in a vegetative state. Now, because there were no prior directives given by her about what to do in case of this event, there were disagreements among different family members about what should be done. Some people thought that she would have wanted to have the plug pulled so that she could rest in peace, right? But other people thought no, she would have wanted to stay attached to the life support machine in the hopes of some kind of miraculous recovery that doesn't seem to be at all possible within the scientific analysis of her case. So anyway, here's a statement that contains a grammatical ambiguity, in other words, an amphibole. It says, Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Now, hearing that statement, Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides. What's the grammatical ambiguity? It lies with the reference of one of those words. Which one? Reading it back, and you can give me your answer whenever you're ready. Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides. What is ambiguous grammatically about that? We don't know what word refers to. Exactly, her husband. So the female pronoun her, it refers to which person? It could be the husband of, fill in the blank. It could be the husband of Schiavo, or it could be the mother's husband, namely the father of Schiavo. As written, it's just impossible to tell which one it is. It says Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle of her life. So her husband could refer to the husband of Schiavo or the husband of the mother. In fact, it was Schiavo's husband that wanted the tube removed, and it was the parents, both of them, that stood on the opposite side and that wanted her to have her life preserved. And there was a whole controversy about it. The governor of Florida at the time, Jeb Bush, sided with the parents and forced her to keep the feeding tube from being removed. But it went into the courts, and eventually a federal appellate court sided with the husband and said that he had power of attorney over her and that his wishes should be respected. So then they did pull the plug. But anyway, as it says in the book, in this statement regarding the issue of whether to remove the feeding tube from Schiavo, the ambiguous wording makes it unclear which conclusion follows. Is it Schiavo's husband or her father who is taking the opposite side? In this case, Schiavo's husband asked to have the feeding tube removed. Her mother and father, believing she still had a chance to regain consciousness, insisted that the feeding tube be kept in place. So anyway, Schiavo died in 2005, shortly after the federal courts upheld the decision to disconnect the tube. Okay, so sometimes with the use of pronouns, we can find a lot of grammatically ambiguous amphiboles. So say Bill and Ted were hanging out and they were talking about his girlfriend. Can you spot the grammatical ambiguity there? Bill and Ted were just chilling, talking about his girlfriend. What's the issue? Someone let me know. It is sad, yes, of course, Sky, but yeah, nothing that can be done, I guess, when you have those kind of terrible injuries. Just got to take care of yourself. But to the other question, though, in the new example, if you follow me, Bill and Ted were hanging out talking about his girlfriend. Yeah, Bill's or Ted's. There's two male subjects named. The male pronoun his could be ambiguously in reference to either one. And so without further clarification, we are left wondering whose girlfriend is the subject that's been mentioned. Another example, I guess, with a lot of people today, some people anyway, we've seen the use of the pronoun they as a replacement for a gendered pronoun like he or she. And this gender neutral pronoun is a good way to avoid assigning a clear gender identity. But of course, sometimes it's a little bit grammatically ambiguous between the singular and the plural. As you know, sometimes they can be a reference to a plural subject rather than an individual. So what if I told you that Julie was watching the soccer team and they were having a really bad time? That's a little ambiguous, I suppose, because it could be a reference to who or what. Julie watching the soccer team and they were just not having a good day. Let me know. The phrase could be in reference to who or who. Who was having the bad day? Was it Julia, or Julie, whatever, who goes by the gender neutral pronoun they, or is it the team itself, which could be referred to under the plural pronoun of they? Now, this is not to say that there's anything wrong or problematic about using these pronouns, but it's just the case that sometimes we have to grammatically disambiguate unclear statements so that people understand exactly what we mean. Another example here from the book. So Clinique is a fragrance company, and they created a fragrance called Happy. And one of the slogans that they had in their marketing materials was just simply, wear it and be happy. Now, the word and is a little bit grammatically ambiguous, though, in terms of what function it's playing. Sometimes we use the word and to express two unrelated facts that are just both true. And in other cases, we use the word and to express a causal connection. So if I say to you that I turn my key and the car starts, that's causation. Like turning the key causes the car to start. But if I say to you, I'm wearing a hoodie and the moon orbits the Earth, there's no causal link between those two things. It's not that wearing the hoodie causes the moon to orbit the Earth. I'm just saying here's a conjunction of two separate, unrelated facts. Now, the fragrance company, Wear It and Be Happy, is playing on that little ambiguity and hoping that you'll take the assumption that by wearing it, it will cause your happiness. But of course, as the book says, the advertiser is hoping we'll fall for the fallacy and make the second interpretation. But if we use the fragrance happy and we're not happier as a result, and then try to sue Clinique for false advertising, we can be sure that they'll say they never intended the term to imply a causal connection. Instead, they will probably say they used and only as a conjunction between two unrelated ideas. Meanwhile, it's money out of our pockets, and now we're less happy. Haha. And one other example from the book, I guess, just to be fully comprehensive. We can sometimes see Amphiboles fallacy used for humorous effect, as like dialogues in comedy and things. As an example of that, from the 1996 movie Spy Hard. So the agent is talking to the director, and the agent says, "Sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar." And the director asks, "What is it?" The agent responds, "Oh, it's this really big rock sticking out of the water off the south coast of Spain." Now, if you can follow the dialogue here, it's humorous because the agent originally says, "Sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar." And the question that was asked, "What is it?" is a bit of a grammatically ambiguous question because it could be in reference to the content of the transmission that was intercepted, or it could be a question about what the Rock of Gibraltar is itself. Now, obviously, the intended meaning was what's the content of the intercepted transmission, but for humorous effect, the agent misunderstands the question as though he was asking literally, what is the Rock of Gibraltar? So overall, to avoid the fallacy of ambiguity, use language and grammar properly, and when you're unsure how to interpret a particular statement, ask another person who said it to rephrase themselves more clearly so that we don't proceed with some kind of ambiguous understanding. Okay, good. So that's the Amphiboles fallacy, and then we can just move on to the next. The next is called the Fallacy of Accent. So the Fallacy of Accent happens when an argument or statement changes meaning depending on which word or phrase within it is accented or emphasized. So the meaning of an argument or statement changes based on which word or phrase within it is emphasized. Okay. There you see the written definition. Okay, so let me explain this one too. One interesting thing about language that we all know is that we can sometimes change the way that someone interprets a single statement or phrase by applying an accent or a stress to different words or phrases within the statement. So in writing, we sometimes see this achieved by means of the use of italics or bolding or all caps in some cases. In language, we hear it by the intonation of the person's voice when they kind of linger on a word a little longer and add an additional inflection to it, or as they can call it, an accent. So let me give you an example of this. I'm about to say a sentence in just a flat monotone with no stress added to any of the words. And of course, you'll understand what it means. But afterwards, I'll try to change the meaning up a little bit by adding some accent. So let me ask this. Why did you steal my bike from me? Now, that has information and we can all understand it. But what if I say it with a little bit of an intonation on certain words? Like if I say this, why did you steal my bike from me? Now I'm adding all the stress to the word bike. And that is supposed to kind of call to mind that of all the things that you could have taken from me, my bike, really? Why'd you take my bike? Couldn't you have taken something else? What if I say it now differently? Why did you steal my bike from me? Now all the stress is put on which word? You. And that sort of calls to mind the idea and highlights the fact that I wouldn't have thought that you, of all people, would steal my bike. Maybe somebody else, but you? Really? Or what if I say, why did you steal my bike from me? Now all the emphasis is placed on the word steal, as though I'm trying to indicate, why didn't you do something else, like ask for it or buy a bike or just borrow it? Um, Why'd you steal the bike from me? Now all the stress is placed on the word me. Like, I know you're a bike thief, but I would have thought that I would be the one person that you might not have stolen a bike from out of all people. So notice that just by jumping around and placing the stress on different words in the same sentence, it kind of has a different vibe to the hearer, to the listener. Okay. Sometimes, though, this can lead us to a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding. So here's an example from the book of this. The mother comes home and sees that the, I don't know, tool shed out back has been burned to the ground and it's just a pile of burning cinders and ash. And what the mother can see is that her daughter has done it because she's got ash and soot on her and she's sitting there with a used up book of matches. So she comes to the daughter upset and she says, "Oh, come on. Why did you do this? Didn't I say don't play with matches?" And the daughter responds back to the mother, "I know, Mom, but I wasn't playing with the matches. I was committing arson, burning down the shed. So how is that a game? How is that playing? So I didn't really break the rule." Now, which word did the daughter accent, which results in a deliberate misinterpretation of the mother's rule? She placed accent and emphasis on the word what? Playing. I wasn't playing with the matches, though. I was doing a science experiment. It's not a game. There's nothing fun games about this. But obviously, when the parent said in the first place, "I don't want you to play with matches," what do you think was the intended meaning by the parent when they say don't play with matches? That means, AKA, don't what with the matches? If you had to say, what do you think it really means when the parent says that?
Don't use them, Matt?
Yeah, like just don't,
matches?
don't use them, don't touch them, don't light them. And when the daughter adds stress to the word, it almost comes off as like, well, she was okay with me using matches as long as I wasn't having fun and games with them. But that's a misinterpretation. Don't touch them, essentially. Right, Sky? Another example I can think of along the same lines. Parent sees a kid hanging out with a friend that they don't like. And so they have a moment privately with the child and they say, "Look, I told you I don't want you to hang out with that friend. And listen, this is the last time. I don't ever want them to walk through our door again. You understand? Don't do that." Okay, so next day, parent comes home, sees that the kid's hanging out with that friend again in their room. And it's like, what is going on? What did I just tell you yesterday? Why are they here? What do you think the kid would say back if they're going to use the accent fallacy to try and get away from their responsibility here? There you go, Gabriel. He climbed to the window. But in the way of saying it, the child would reply, "I know. You said don't let him through the door again. And that's why I let them climb up through the window. So I didn't actually technically break the rule." But here again, by adding an accent to the word through the door, it makes it seem as though the parent's rule was they can enter the house, but as long as they don't gain entry through the front door. Obviously, that's a more narrow interpretation of the statement than the parent actually intended. And the miscommunication is again affected by this use of accent. Now, other examples from the book. School administration puts in an article in the school newspaper that says they're going to crack down on off-campus drinking. Student reads the article and says, "Nice, I'm glad they're going to crack down on off-campus drinking, so now I can bring a flask to school and drink on campus." But obviously the rule change or implementation, yeah, exactly, Sky, for sure. But when the student says, "Oh, I'm glad they're cracking down on off-campus drinking, so now I can drink on campus," that's not what was intended. It just means that they're going to add new policies that cover rules about drinking at school events, sporting events, and things that are organized by the school and its administration. That does not mean that they're going to allow drinking on campus, just because now they say we're going to crack down on off-campus drinking. But by placing all the stress on the word off campus, It makes it seem like that permission was given. Okay, now these examples are maybe a little silly, but there's also cases of accent fallacy where there's a little more at stake. Let me go back to something we talked about earlier today. We talked about cults to begin the meeting, right? And sometimes what these cults will do to try and generate recruitment is to do what is called proof texting. What that is to try and manipulate a person by relying on their already existing religious beliefs and to try and use that as like a window into deeper involvement in the cult. Basically, what they'll do is they'll quote passages from biblical scripture out of context and place accent and emphasis on some of those words to try and change the meaning so it makes it seem like the cult's message is in line with the Bible. So, like, here's an example. The Brethren, led by Jim Roberts, they tell people that they're trying to recruit. You're a Christian, right? You read the Bible, so you agree with Luke 14:33, where it says, "So likewise, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple." Well, come on, what do you think it means when he says you have to forsake all that you have? That means to give up your friends, family, and worldly possessions and join the brethren. I mean, it's right there in the Bible, so you should just join us now. Or another passage. It says in the Bible that you need to be thy brother's keeper. Brother's keeper. Who do you think the brothers are? We're the brethren, so it's telling you you're supposed to stick with us and join this cult. Now, obviously, that's taking biblical passages out of context to try and generate support for something that's not consistent with these religious principles. So, in many cases, people will try to convince you of things by adding these stresses and accents, changing the thing from its original context. So, and of course, Jesus and his disciples never completely disowned their family or friends. And so the cult leader ignores all that when they commit the fallacy of accent. So anyway, if you're not sure which term is being emphasized or accented in an argument or a statement, ask the person who gave the original statement to repeat or explain what they meant. And if you think that something's being taken out of context, go back and look at the original source. If you thought that someone was trying to quote biblical scripture out of context, go back to the King James Version of the Bible, read it, and not just the one passage, but in the broader context of the surrounding words and statements as well. Okay, so there we have an accent fallacy. Now we can move ahead on to the last two. So 2 more fallacies, everybody, for this meeting today. There's, what's the context for the quotes that you gave? You mean the ones that I was just referring to? Luke 14:33. You know, I would have, you're putting me on the spot. I guess I probably should have looked in the Bible before I taught this lesson, but I would have to find the passage myself and then see the surrounding scriptures in there. But what the book offers us anyway is that viewed in the broader context, Jesus was never known to have separated from all his friends or to live in a life of isolation from family members and friends. So that would seem to contradict the narrow interpretation given by the cult in this case. So anyway, though, 2 more. Division and composition. So here is the fallacy of division, everybody. Fallacy of division, what it basically does is it involves an erroneous, meaning in error, an erroneous inference from the characteristics of the whole group down to each member of the group. So one erroneously infers that a characteristic of a group is a characteristic of each member of the group. Okay. One erroneously infers that a characteristic of a whole group is a characteristic of each member of the group. And that's not necessarily true in all cases. Here's the form that the division fallacy takes if you looked at its logical structure. It would have a first premise that says something like this. Group G, some group, has characteristic C. Okay, first premise line. Second premise, we'll just continue by saying X is some individual that's a member of the group G. Okay, so what would appear anyway to be our conclusion would be that because group G has characteristic C, and because X is a member of group G, conclusion of the division fallacy is that X, the individual, has the same characteristic that the group has, namely C. Okay. Now we're going to see why this is not a good type of way to argue. So let's go with the concept. This is an example from the book. Men, just as a whole, as a group, are taller than women. Yes, men are taller than women if you just look at average height. The average male height in our country, I think it's like 5'11", and the average female height, I think it's like 5'5". So yes, men are generally taller than women. But now suppose that I pick out one individual man, Danny Devito. So men are taller than women. Danny Devito is a man. So therefore, what is the conclusion? That Danny Devito is taller than women. But I don't know if this is a great reference. I'm taking it from the book. Maybe this actor is a little bit less current day than some of us would have liked. But do any of you know who he is? Danny DeVito is very short. He's a comedian. He acts in the sitcom It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think he's the owner of the bar in that comedy series. He did some funny movies back in the 80s, like Twins. Is he a meme now? Okay, that's funny. Yeah. There's also, I don't know, if you want a more modern example, who's a short guy now? Kevin Hart? Is he shorter than the average woman? Maybe, but anyway, men are taller than women. Kevin Hart is a man, and therefore Kevin Hart is taller than women. No. So yes, even though the whole group as a general matter has this feature, it doesn't mean that each individual member has that same feature. Okay, good, Sky. I'm glad that you guys know about him. And in general, we see examples like this all across the board. Sometimes stereotyping can lead to this type of fallacy. I don't want to repeat any bad stereotypes about people because those are not good. But sometimes there are generous stereotypes, like Canadians are sort of have a cultural reputation for being very nice, very helpful and friendly to people. So take that. Canadians are nice. Let's see, Derek is a Canadian, and therefore Derek is nice, but not necessarily true. Even if the overall reputation of the culture at large is that way, we always know that there's going to be some people that don't fit into the cultural norm. So it would be wrong to say of the one person that because they are a member of the group, they have a feature seen in the whole group. My family is loud. I'm a member of my family, and therefore I am loud. No, not necessarily. I mean, you can have a loud family with a few members at least that are different from the norm within the group. I don't know. Let's see. The hotel is large. Room 101 is a part of the hotel. So therefore, room 101 is large. That doesn't follow either. You can have a large hotel built by a lot of small rooms. And so once again, we see examples of the division fallacy. How about this? The United States is the wealthiest country in the world. True. You are a citizen of the United States, so you're a member of that group, and therefore you are the wealthiest person in the world, or one of the wealthiest people in the world. That certainly doesn't follow either. Again, sometimes, as they say, the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, and so this would be an example of that. The country, as a general whole collective, has massive wealth and military might, but that does not mean that each individual atomic part of this big system has the same. So those are cases of the division fallacy. And we call it division because the form of the argument starts with a claim about a whole group, and then the conclusion divides down to each one member, or at least one member of the group. Yeah, well, it's sort of like generalizing, but it's almost in the opposite direction. The group is acknowledged to have this general feature, but that does not necessarily imply that every single individual part of it has the same feature. Now, composition, guys, is much the same. Or I don't know, here's another one. The Milwaukee Bucks are NBA champions. And then suppose that I refer to some member of the team that was acquired in the offseason after the title was won. And then I say that person's a member of the team, so they're an NBA champion, but they're not because the team, they have the championship banner hanging up in the rafters. The team as a whole, with its institutional status and its history, has the title. And the players that were on that winning team have titles, but that does not necessarily mean that every active current player is an NBA champion. Okay, now one more is the fallacy of composition. Fallacy of composition is kind of like just the twin of division, except in the opposite direction. So in this case, we say that one erroneously infers that a characteristic of a member of a group is a characteristic of the whole group. Okay, just getting that definition in there. Gabriel, similar things aren't always common, even in the world of fractals. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that within the fractal, each piece can generate the entire image if you zoom in on it enough. But yes, I guess there will still be distinctive features that the parts have that the whole doesn't have. Interesting point to make for sure. Let's get us into this last topic, fallacy of composition. So it's just the opposite of division, guys. It's where you start with a claim about an individual member of a group, and then you make a broad conclusion about the whole group just based on the one member. So with division, we start with the group and we divide down to the member. With composition, we start with the member and we build up and compose to the whole group. And the structure and form that the composition fallacy has can also be written, and it is like this. X is a member of group G. Okay, that's our first little premise. X is a member of group G. The second one would say that X, the individual member of G, has characteristic C. Okay, so X is a member of a group, X has a certain feature, and the conclusion, the erroneous, fallacious conclusion is just therefore that group G as a whole has that characteristic, C. The one member does. Okay, and again, that's a fallacy. So room 101 is small. The rooms in the hotel are small, so therefore the whole hotel is small. No. You can have a large hotel built out of small rooms. Here's another one. The cells in my body are not visible to the naked eye. And therefore I am not visible to the naked eye. Come on, clearly not. The individual parts are microscopic, but the thing that they form when they combine together is clearly visible, as you can just tell right now. So although the individual component parts or atomic elements of something can have features, that's not necessarily to be assessed as the same thing that the whole thing formed by those parts would have. Here's another example from our book. Sodium and chloride individually are highly toxic and unstable and dangerous to human beings. So therefore, sodium chloride, the composite of the two, is highly toxic and dangerous to human beings. But no, sodium chloride is just a sort of fancy scientific name for table salt, NaCl. And it's interesting to know that the individual elements in that molecular compound are very dangerous for you if you had them alone. But when they combine together, they are salt, which is a staple of everybody's diet that we eat every day. So again, we see examples of the composition fallacy. Hopefully this is coming through clearly to you guys. And again, it's when a characteristic of a member of a group is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of the whole group. So we can neither just quickly assume that from one individual's aspects or characteristics that the whole group of which they are a part has those features, nor can we easily assume that a group which has a general feature must show that feature in every single member as well. Okay, I'm a professor. Dr. Vulich is a professor. Dr. Vulich can play guitar, and so therefore professors can play guitar. Not necessarily, though. It's something that is maybe not generally seen in many of the other academics that I know anyway. So I have a feature and I'm a member of a group, but that doesn't stand for the whole group necessarily, and on and on. So that's really, I think, all I had on these fallacies for today. This is our opening gambit into the world of fallacies. In total, we're going to learn 20 of these. Today we have 5, and then we'll learn 8 more on Tuesday. Those will be the fallacies of relevance. And then we have 7 more to follow on next Thursday, and those are the fallacies of unwarranted assumption, for a total of 20 in the end. And the next homework assignment that I'm going to give you guys after our Tuesday meeting is going to be involving looking at a set of problems in the workbook where you just have to identify which fallacy is written in each example. But I can't give you that homework yet because it involves the group of fallacies that we will learn on Tuesday specifically. So my plan is we'll learn them on Tuesday, then I'll assign the homework for you, and it'll be due a little later than the original listed date. Instead of Thursday, I'll push it out to maybe Friday or Saturday so you have more time to work on it. But that's about it for today, everybody. So I guess unless there's other questions, comments, or anything else you need, I'll probably close these streams pretty soon. Make sure to notice I'm going to send off the link for this office hours that I hold every Thursday from 4 to 5. If anybody has any reason to want to stop by, you can do that. And tomorrow I will post the recording of this lecture to our Canvas page so that you can have it for your notes and review later. But all right, guys, let me sign off, but I'd love to see if you guys want to say goodbye or something, and then I'll close these two streams one by one. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I'm going to close the Zoom stream first. So to all the Zoom people, have a great day, and I'll be back with you after the weekend, and we'll be in touch by email if you need anything. Okay, so ending the Zoom. Thanks. And now to my YouTubers, let me just close this one too. All right, guys, signing off. Have a great day. Yes, Zoomers and tubers, that's what it is in this class. Anyway, guys, have a great one, and keep in touch if you need anything. Bye-bye. Thank you.